President-elect Donald Trump's White House team is taking shape, and street protests against his election win continue across the nation. Here with analysis is former RNC chairman Michael Steele. And later, Pope Francis is creating new cardinals in Rome this week, while 4 of his church princes have issued a public request for clarification of a controversial synod document. Papal Posse member Robert Royal and the National Catholic Register's Edward Penton join me from Rome. And finally, Fox News chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is here to talk about William F. Buckley and the new book, A Torch Kept Lit. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Forgive my voice tonight. Allergies are horrible things, but we carry on. Michael Steele, Robert Royal, and Edward Penton from Rome, as well as James Rosen, are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. Find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. As we reported first earlier today, the long dispute over the remains of Archbishop Fulton Sheen has finally come to an end. The New York Supreme Court on Thursday ordered the New York Archdiocese to release Archbishop Sheen's body to Peoria, Illinois, immediately. Sheen, who died in 1979, is buried in the crypt of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan. New York was unwilling to release the body, so Sheen's sainthood process could continue. It is customary that the remains of a saint be interred where the sainthood petition was filed, in this case, Peoria. After the New York Archdiocese refused to release Sheen's body, his relative, Joan Cunningham, begged the court to compel them to release the body to Peoria so the canonization effort could continue. Sheen's remains will be interred in a marble crypt built near the altar at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria, where the El Paso native was ordained a priest. If canonized, Sheen would be the first American-born bishop to reach sainthood. With Inauguration Day a little more than 2 months away, Team Trump is hitting the ground running. While President-elect Donald Trump vets potential cabinet picks from New York's Trump Tower, Vice President-elect Michael Pence met with House Republicans on Capitol Hill on Thursday. According to House GOP leaders, the president-elect is seeking a short-term spending bill to keep the government running through March of next year. The current stopgap spending measure runs out on December 9th. Such a move would give next year's Republican-controlled government time to consider a boost in military spending, Trump's trillion-dollar infrastructure proposal, and potential cuts in other domestic programs. More on the Trump transition in our next segment. And one-time Democratic candidate for President Bernie Sanders is calling for a new direction for the Democratic Party. The Vermont senator said at a D.C. rally on Thursday that Donald Trump's victory in the presidential race was, in fact, a failure for Democrats.
When you lose the White House to the least popular candidate in the history of America, when you lose the Senate, when you lose the House, and when 2/3 of governors in this country are Republicans, it is time for a new direction for the Democratic Party.
Sanders said that Democrats need to recognize what Donald Trump recognizes, namely that there are millions of working class, middle class, and low-income people who are living in despair. Moving overseas, it was another week of deadly airstrikes in the besieged city of Aleppo. Another 100 deaths have been reported as Russian and Syrian government forces continued to pound what they say are rebel-held positions. Airstrikes on Wednesday struck the city's central blood bank, a children's hospital, and another surgical center. A water treatment plant was also hit this week. This year alone, 126 medical facilities have come under attack, according to the World Health Organization. Months of negotiations between the U.S. and Russia have failed to cement a long-term ceasefire between the forces of Syrian President Assad and the rebels fighting to topple him. And a high-level UN climate change conference got underway in Morocco this week. The talks are the continuation of last year's Paris Accords, which sought to stop the warming of the Earth's climate. Nations are a bit nervous about U.S. participation in the agreement in the wake of Donald Trump's victory. The president-elect has referred to climate change as a hoax and promised to cancel U.S. involvement in the agreement. On Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry assured the assembled that the U.S. would continue to fight global warming and that an overwhelming majority of Americans believe climate change is real. Pope Francis also weighed in on the matter. In a statement released in advance of the conference, the Pope said the international community has a, quote, serious ethical and moral responsibility to act without delay to fight global warming. And 4 prominent cardinals went public this week with a controversial letter asking Pope Francis to clarify certain points included in his apostolic exhortation on the family, Amoris Laetitia. The letter was originally sent in September, but since the Pope has yet to answer their concerns, the cardinals released the letter to the press. Cardinals Raymond Burke, Carlo Caffarra, Joachim Meisner, and Walter Brandmüller asked Francis for clarity on communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. The high-ranking cardinals say they were, quote, compelled in conscience by our pastoral responsibility to press Pope Francis to clear up matters of uncertainty and confusion that have occurred since the exhortation on the family was released. Moreover, Cardinal Burke said if the Pope doesn't definitively clarify church teaching on this matter, then tradition allows for the correction of the Roman Pontiff. More on this in our next segment. And in a rare video speech given in English, Pope Francis offered praise for the Catholic Church in the U.S., singling out its outreach to Latino immigrants and the specific gifts that Hispanic Catholics have offered. The Pope spoke on Tuesday to the U.S. bishops meeting in Baltimore.
Our great challenge is to create a culture of encounter which encourages individuals and groups to share the richness of state traditions and experience, to break down walls, and to build bridges. We are called to be bearers of good news for a society gripped by disconcerting social, cultural and spiritual shifts at increasing polarization.
Meanwhile, the full body of the U.S. bishops openly endorsed a statement that both congratulates President-elect Donald Trump and assures migrants and refugees that the bishops remain in solidarity with them. The statement was drafted by the chair of the Bishops' Committee on Migration. It said that it is their prayer that the Trump administration recognizes the contributions of migrants and immigrants to the overall prosperity and well-being of the country. And the U.S. Bishops' Conference also elected new leaders this week. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo of Galveston, Houston, will be the new USCCB president, and Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles, a member of Opus Dei, was elected vice president. Some church observers say these picks may indicate a response to Pope Francis's decision to make progressive archbishops, Blaise Cupich of Chicago and William Tobin of Newark, cardinals in the consistory in Rome this weekend. And there are rumors and reports of some extraordinary phenomena taking place at Christ's tomb. Workers engaged in a restoration project at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem have reported a sweet aroma emanating from the open tomb, a floral scent. Curiously, in 1809, during the last opening of Christ's tomb, a chronicle also makes mention of a sweet scent. Separately, workers have also reported that some electronic devices left near the tomb began to malfunction or cease to work altogether, suggesting that there had been a powerful electromagnetic force present. Observers and reporters at the site are short on answers that would explain the strange occurrences. And one of public television's most well-known journalists, Gwen Ifill, died following a battle with cancer on Monday. She was 61. Ifill was the longtime co-host of the PBS NewsHour and noted debate moderator for several campaign seasons. Our thoughts and prayers go out to Gwen's family and friends. May she rest in peace. And with Christmas just around the corner, remember my new Christmas project, Christmas Time in New Orleans. The original soundtrack with splendid new jazz arrangements of Christmas favorites is available from the EWTN catalog, as well as Amazon and wherever CDs are sold. And the Christmas Time in New Orleans PBS special airs after Thanksgiving, but the extended cut DVD is available now from Amazon and other retailers. Go check it out. When we return, the Trump team is being assembled in D.C. and New York. What should we think of the appointments made thus far? And what of those street protests? Former RNC Chairman Michael Steele is here when the world over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Forgive this voice. Years ago, there was a theater critic who wrote a review of Carol Channing in Hello, Dolly, and he said 40 years ago, it sounded as if Carol Channing had a frog in her throat. But now, in this revival of Hello, Dolly, it sounds like the frog has Carol Channing in her throat. So I'm the Raymond Arroyo in the frog's throat. It's been a week since Donald Trump went from GOP nominee to president-elect. As he assembles his team here in Washington and in New York, there have been demonstrations, some violent, and they've broken out all over the country in protest of his election. Here to analyze all of it and give us a post-electoral analysis is former chairman of the Republican National Committee and current political analyst for MSNBC, Michael Steele.
Hey,
Michael, great
to be back, buddy.
Forgive my croak.
No, that's all right. You and Carol Channing.
Yeah, well, you'll always remember that.
I will.
Tell me about these protests. What are they?
Well,
do you think they're authentic, or is this what Nancy Pelosi used to call astroturf?
Well, yeah, right. I think some of it, a lot of it is authentic. There's no doubt about it. I've had a lot of friends that I've had to provide a little counseling to since the election, to my amusement and amazement. A lot of people took this election very seriously for a lot of different reasons. And so this natural reaction afterwards, like they could not believe, because they had been told and the evidence indicated that Hillary Clinton was going to win this thing. But that's not how it turned out. So there is that aspect of it. But then there are those who are professional anarchists, who are professional protesters, who are wound up like little rag dolls and thrown out into the crowds to cause the kind of damage and destruction that we've seen at some of these rallies. And that is unfortunate. I think my overall takeaway is, having heard from Bernie Sanders, for example, telling his people, stand down. Having heard from Donald Trump telling his people, don't engage, stand down. Having not heard so much from Hillary Clinton and the president on this, because I was thinking if this were in reverse, they would be the first ones saying, Donald Trump, tell your people to chill.
Right.
But that's not so much what we're hearing. I still think, though, there's going to be this expression. This is going to continue right up into, I think, in large measure, the inauguration. Although when the weather gets a little bit nippy, it may be a smaller crowd, a smaller crowd. But yeah, it's a part of what we do in America, I guess, these days. But Donald Trump seems largely unfazed by it.
I don't remember protests of President Barack
that's what I'm saying,
Obama,
these
either
days,
first
right.
or second
time. And that's exactly right. And so I think the left in their angst and frustration about the outcome need to spend less time on the streets protesting and more time sort of gathering and figure out how they're going to be a functional, loyal opposition over the next 4 years.
Let's talk for a moment about Steve Bannon, who is President-elect Trump's senior counselor, chief strategist. There's been a lot of controversy. Some on the Hill asking for Trump to withdraw the choice. Here's Harry Reid and then Kellyanne Conway, who was the Trump campaign manager.
If Trump is serious about seeking unity, the first thing he should do is rescind his appointment with Steve Bannon. Rescind him. Don't do it. Think about this. Don't do it. As long as a champion of racial division is a step away from the Oval Office, it will be impossible to take Trump's efforts to heal the nation seriously.
That I work very closely with Steve Bannon. He's been the general of this campaign, and frankly, people should look at the full resume.
Do you see Donald Trump rescinding this nomination?
No, not in the least. Donald Trump could care less about who's upset about Steve Bannon being on his team. Steve Bannon has been there from the very beginning. So if he could be there and people weren't, going out of their minds over that, what's the difference now? Oh, suddenly he's at the White House and that's a problem? So the reality is simply this. That's a bright, shining object that Harry Reid and others want to fixate on. You guys go ahead and fixate on that all you want. The reality of it is very simply, Donald Trump is going to have near him the people he's going to rely on to help him govern the nation.
What does Trump bring? What does Bannon bring to the table? What is his role, do you think?
Well, he's a muse. I mean, he's that sounding board. He's the one that Trump sort of talks out what he's thinking, what he's feeling about a policy or an issue or an idea. Bannon helps put it into some context. He helps clarify it for him and sort of give it some level of resonance with the overall strategy that the president-elect is trying to put forth. So every president has had one. John F. Kennedy had his brother, as a matter of fact. And certainly, Ronald Reagan had Nancy. So everyone has, and to be quite honestly, Barack Obama has Valerie Jarrett.
Right.
So that's the reality. They're focused on helping the president. He and his team are focused on helping the president build out his cabinet and build out the first 100 days of this administration.
And he's a really smart guy. I mean, I've met Steve Bannon.
Smart guy. He's a veteran of our armed forces. He's like you said, a very intelligent person. But he's a guy who's going to throw some grenades because he does not suffer the status quo lightly, and he sees that as being one of the big reasons why our country is where it is today, economically, socially, et cetera.
He's also a Catholic, and he's spoken out several times on various things about economic policy of the Vatican, climate change. It'll be interesting to see how that plays in relation to the bishops, which we can talk about later. Let's talk about Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, presumably, appointed by Donald Trump. What role does he play? He would not be in the Bannon column. No,
certainly not in the Bannon column. In fact, he's more of a functionary to sort of deal with the day-to-day staff issues. And, he's going to be a gatekeeper of sorts, who gets in to see the president, who doesn't get in to see the president. But I think Bannon will also have his own door. For people who will get to see President Trump and who will get to talk to President Trump. That, I suspect, will set up an internal conflict because the chief of staff historically has been the last person, the last defense to the Oval Office. If Bannon has the ability to say, Mr. President, I'd like you to meet with so-and-so, going around Reince, that's a problem. But the other thing to keep in mind is understanding the roles of these individuals. Bannon is a muse. Bannon is someone who's been with Trump, knows Trump. Strategist, tapped into that vein for Trump. Reince is the guy who got the trains running on time and cleared some bricks out of the way on the tracks to the nomination and ultimately to the election. His relationship is stronger with Paul Ryan in Capitol Hill than it is with Donald Trump. Now, they hug each other and they do the bromance thing. But my suspicion is at the end of the day, Paul Ryan will have more in the chief of staff's ear than not. He will also serve as a way to sort of share maybe a little bit beforehand what the Trump administration is looking to do to kind of gives an advantage to the Hill. That concerns a lot of conservatives right now who are more interested in draining the swamp they're not happy to see some of the swamp water being put in glasses and set up in the Oval Office.
Let's talk about the Paul Ryan relationship here. It appears this week he was renominated by the GOP caucus and will go on to continue his role as Speaker of the House. He seemed very confident and presented a unified front. Listen.
This leadership team is unified. This entire House Republican Conference is unified. And we are so eager to get to work with our new president-elect to fix America's pressing problems.
Will there be tensions here, do you think, between the Trump White House and Paul Ryan?
Absolutely, because while they do the kumbaya, we're on the same page, they really aren't. They're not. Because Donald Trump has, in the making, as I understand it, $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Okay, that's with a T. And so that is not on the agenda for the House or the Senate. Donald Trump has made it very clear he will undo TPP. The Ryan team and certainly the McConnell team in the Senate, they're more interested in passing TPP. In fact, I think we need to look out to see how President Obama and Paul Ryan sort of navigate those waters between now and the inauguration to get TPP secured so Trump won't be able to do anything about it. But here's the rub. Even if they do that still won't stop the president from upending it once he comes in. So TPP will be a sticking point for the Ryan team if Donald Trump pursues it the way he wants to, as aggressively as he wants to.
What do you think will be the number one priority in the first 100 days? Obamacare, immigration and the border wall, the tax rates?
All three.
What do you think?
All three. All three of those change in priority 1, 2, 3. But you might as well say they're all kind of number one. You know, 1A, 1B. And so they're going to track on several levels.
They'll move that stuff fast.
They'll move it fast. They'll have a tax bill that they're going to be working on, and largely what had come out of the House before by Paul Ryan in the Budget Committee on budget and tax reform. So you'll have that piece, the wall piece. Trump has signaled that, you know, there's some aspects of that you know, it could be a physical wall. In other places, it may be a fence.
Right.
The underlying core of that, though, is going to be bodies on the ground, boots on the ground, in terms of enforcement agents and using technology, aerial surveillance and things like that more effectively than we have. So that'll be a combination of things. And then, of course, health care. Again, he slide off a little bit, so it's not so much repeal and replace as it is amend, which could be an interesting little sticking point for a lot of folks out there who want Obamacare to go away lock, stock, and barrel.
Right.
He's now saying, okay, well, we'll keep pre-existing conditions, which was a part of the original Republican plan, so that's nothing new. Keeping your kids on till the 27, again, part of the original Republican plan, so that's nothing new. If he adds anything else that kind of falls outside of that, could get a little sticky.
Let's talk about immigration for a moment. The president-elect has committed to targeting criminal aliens who are in the country first, rounding them up, and then getting a sense of who else is here, undocumented or documented. The Bishops' Conference this week met in Baltimore. They, if you read some of the press accounts, they are standing with the migrants and the refugees. Your thoughts on what, if any, influence they might have on this policy?
I think Donald Trump will, out of respect, take note of that, and as any president largely would. But this is not the days where, you know, the bishops were back in the 80s where they could say, and everyone's like, okay, what'd they say now?
Well, there are people listening to them in the 80s.
Right. And I think, you know, in large measure, by the end of the Reagan term, they had pretty much dispensed with that. They've figured out how to provide an appropriate check. And because a lot of what the bishops were advocating had been proven out to be dangerous policy in many respects. So I think here they'll give deference to it, but it's not going to shape the policy. You can protest, you can, you know, say we stand with the migrant workers, but that's not where America is. America's not in that box. America's say, okay, you're a migrant worker, fine, let's check your papers. You're a migrant worker, how did you get here? Are you going back? What are you doing? So there's that's the sensibility now in America that is a far cry from, oh, y'all come, we just love y'all, and you know, we'll help you make a home here. A lot of Americans are saying, not at the expense of my family, not at the expense of my business, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the bishops also have a tough argument to make in that they are the recipients of a $91 million annual grant to resettle refugees and migrants. It makes it seem as if they're trying to protect their grant. You know, and so they've got to broaden the moral argument.
And that's why you keep your mouth shut on these things. You just go about doing what you've been charged to do and what the grant allows you to do. You don't need to step into that political space in change, particularly when you're changing to an administration that has a very, very strong view on that very matter.
And people voted for him because of the tough enforcement of the border. Final question, term limits. Donald Trump said he would like to see term limits. Mitch McConnell, on the Senate Majority Leader, has already said, we're not going to look into this.
Well, that'll be interesting. Mitch McConnell may have to eat some of those words if Donald Trump's legislative team puts a bill to the body and then makes that an issue to campaign on in 2018. And so I think that the American people, by exit polls and other polls show, in large measure, they want a limit on the terms of members of Congress, the United States Senate. The attitude and the thinking is if we can limit the president to 2 terms, we can put limits on the people who've been there for 40, 50 years, who've literally done nothing, and as the country has slid into the abyss. So they like the idea of turnover, fresh blood. Now, the central argument has always been, oh, well, you're losing institutional knowledge. And as one person said to me, well, that knowledge doesn't seem to be working for us, so we can lose it.
So, Michael Seal,
you got it,
thanks for being here. We'll see you again soon.
Now.
When we return, new Cardinals will receive red hats in Rome this week, while 4 established Cardinals are causing controversy by going public with a request that Pope Francis clarify his teaching on communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. Robert Royal and Edward Penton join me from Rome when The World Over continues. Don't miss this.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Just days before a consistory where he will appoint new cardinals, a group of Vatican cardinals went public this week with a request for Pope Francis to clarify his controversial apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia. Here to analyze it all for us is a member of the papal posse, the editor-in-chief of theCatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, and the National Catholic Register's Vatican correspondent, Edward Penton. They both join us from Rome. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I want to get into this letter that Cardinal Burke, Raymond Burke, not Edmund Burke, and a few others distributed this week. In it, they asked the Pope to clarify the teaching in Amoris Laetitia, particularly as it regards giving communion to divorced and remarried Catholics without an annulment. You, Edward, interviewed Cardinal Burke, and he said this: the initiative is aimed at one thing only, and that is the good of the Church. So we cardinals judged it our responsibility to request a clarification with regard to these questions in order to put an end to this spread of confusion that is actually leading people into error. What do you make of this? How is it being received there at this consistory?
Well, as you heard, Raymond, it really is aimed at, it's an act of justice and charity, really, aimed at bringing unity to the Church. The Cardinal Burke and the other cardinals, their great concern is that it's a deep pastoral concern, they say, and they say that their main aim is really to bring unity to the Church because of the ambiguities from Amoris Laetitia, which they say have led to a diverse number of interpretations. And so this is really aimed at clearing it up. There's been no formal reaction from the Vatican, but I do understand from sources within Santa Marta that the Pope is not happy at all. In fact, he's quoted as boiling with rage, so he's really not happy at all with this. But he had been given 2 months to respond to it. He chose not to respond to it, and so the cardinals went public.
Robert Royal, I want to ask you about this. Edward also asked Cardinal Burke about that lack of papal response and what happens if the letter remains unanswered. Burke said this: then we would have to address that situation. Cardinal Burke says, there is in the tradition of the Church the practice of correction of the Roman pontiff. It is something that is clearly quite rare, but if there is no response to these questions, then I would say that it would be a question of taking a formal act of correction of a serious error. How would that play out, Bob?
Well, I don't think we would know. Since it's so rare and it's not happened in modern times, there are no precedents that we can refer back to. But I think we would have to say that there would have to be some sort of coordinated effort on the parts of lots of people. There have been other appeals. You know, there was a filial appeal a few years ago that got 800,000 signatures, and then there were 45 theologians a few months ago who asked for a clarification about Amoris Laetitia. And what the mechanism would be or how it would play out, I don't know. I don't know myself that the Holy Father can respond to this or will respond to it in the way that they're expecting. And it's not just about the practical matters, Raymond. I mean, the question of communion for the divorced and remarried, I think, is something that the Holy Father wanted to establish as a praxis in a limited number of cases. But some of the questions that they ask also have to do with theoretical matters. Do circumstances make what are objective moral evils not moral evils? Does conscience have a right to decide on its own over and above what the tradition and the established teachings of the Church have put out there? So there are immediate practical things that will have to be decided. There are these theoretical things. How they will go about asking the Holy Father from this point on, unless there's a larger group of cardinals somewhere who want to join with them, and maybe archbishops, I don't know. But certainly this is unprecedented, and it's something that will not go away easily.
Let's talk about this consistory going on this week. 17 new cardinals will be named, 13 electors. Give me a sense, Edward Penton, of how the Pope Francis, is seeking to remake this College of Cardinals. Obviously, these cardinals hail from far-flung parts of the world, but what does that mean? What in your sense, is the Pope trying to do through these appointments of red hats?
Well, really like the last two consistories he's held, cardinal-making consistories, Raymond, he wants to bring in cardinals from the periphery, so from countries that don't normally have cardinals. I think there are three that have not had cardinals ever, and they now have one. So I think that's part of his effort to bring in those who aren't well represented in the universal church, but in places where the church is growing fastest, like sub-Saharan Africa. So that's his main aim, I think. But it doesn't always hold up, because there are a few cardinalatial sees which have received red hats, namely Madrid and Brussels. And Chicago, of course, which are the usual ones. So, so there's some reaching out to the peripheries, but at the same time, there's some who have traditionally got red hats who are doing so this time as well.
Robert Royal, do you see anything beyond just trying to expand the College of Cardinals and include more of the world? Is there something else at play? Clearly, the three red hats in the United States, all three of these men are regarded as progressives in the Church. Cardinal Cupich and Kevin Farrell and Tobin.
Yeah, I don't know that this is so much an ideological set of appointments, although the American appointments seem to be a little bit more in that direction than the others. As Edward was saying, several of the appointments, the Archbishop of Brasilia, for example, the Archbishop of Madrid, the Archbishop of Brussels. Now, the Archbishop who's been made a cardinal in Brussels is an odd choice, because he has some troubling history over mishandling priestly sexual abuse. And he's rumored to be something of a progressive, and Brussels is, after all, the capital of the European Union, and it doesn't really reflect a very strong desire to shape Europe. I don't see the Holy Father as trying to do much with Europe with these appointments. Those appointments in sub-Saharan Africa and some in Asia, I think that, as everyone knows, that those are the places where the Church will be growing in the future. It's a little odd that he's appointed so many cardinals from these so-called peripheries, because there aren't many Catholics there right now. it's almost as if he's pre-positioned them, but it doesn't make a lot of sense right now for what he's doing. One of the cardinals that we've discussed who seems to be very strong is from the Central African Republic. I can't pronounce his name because it's a combination of French and it's Dieudonné something African that I can't remember. But he seems to be a very good young man. He'll be the youngest cardinal now when he's made a cardinal on Saturday. And he's dealt with refugees a lot. So it may be that the Holy Father has it in mind that the Church is going to have to deal with some circumstances that in the past would have been marginal or peripheral to the governing of the Church, but those things may now be becoming more central.
Gentlemen, I want your take on something that happened this week. Pope Francis gave yet another interview to Eugenio Scalfari, who's an Italian journalist, an atheist. He's in his 90s. He barely remembers things, and he doesn't take notes, apparently. But he asked the Pope, wondering whether Francis might envision a Marxist-type society. And the Pope said this: "It has been said many times, and my response has always been that, if anything, it is the communists who think like Christians." Your reaction to this, Edward Penton and Bob?
Well, I mean, I think this is the fourth interview now that the Pope has granted Scalfari, and again, Scalfari hasn't taken notes. He's done it from memory. Don't forget, he's 92 years old. So it's a mystery why the Pope is giving these interviews. One theory is that actually he thinks that Scalfari is the best at interpreting the spirit of Pope Francis. This is the theory at the moment. And that's why he chooses him, because he conveys his messages probably the most authentic way. But there has been a lot of concern about his comments, particularly if you think of Chinese Catholics and they hear the Pope saying that about communism. You know, it is a rather big mystery why he'd say that. But anyway, that is the background to these interviews, and it's just a mystery why they continue.
Robert, what do you think?
I was struck by a phrase in that interview where the Pope said that inequality, if we believe this is what he actually said, that inequality is the greatest evil in the world. Now, you know, gross conditions of inequality of wealth, where people are destitute while others are living lavish lifestyles, are bad things. But inequality is sort of a natural condition. God makes us with different talents, with different energies, puts us in different circumstances. That kind of inequality strikes me as the Marxist language that the Pope probably didn't use, but we never know, because he, in these interview situations, he sometimes gets going and he says more or less than he needs. He really means to say. I was speaking with a very distinguished Catholic philosopher here in Rome today, and he said at some point somebody is going to have to put together in a more global way all these individual insights that the Pope has, because they seem to contradict one another, and behind them there may be a different vision than what we're perceiving.
Before I let you all go, there was another interview that emerged. A book of the Pope's homilies are being made public, and as part of that, he was interviewed. In it, he said that it is a mistake to refer to the reform of the reform when talking about the liturgy, and he sort of dissed young people who attend the Latin Mass. He said that if you dig deep enough, you'll find rigidity there, much rigidity. Your reaction to these comments, and how are they being received in Rome?
Well, I just think it's a continuation, really, of what the Pope has said quite a lot lately, which is that his concern about what he calls rigidity. There's different interpretations about what he means by that, but it has concerned some people who feel that, you know, if people are just trying to uphold the teachings of the Church, maybe he's having a go at them, but he's not been clear about that. So it's really not clear who he's directing them to, but certainly it seems to be coherent with his wish to reform the Church and to sort of bring down barriers and walls that he sees have been put up over the centuries. So I think it's connected with that. But who knows, really? But it hasn't been that well received, I must say, by the people that I've spoken to here, who are a bit concerned about all this talk about or criticism of those who are really trying to uphold the Church's teaching.
And Robert Royal, I'll go to you for the last word. Your thoughts on this? I mean, was Pope Benedict in error when he said we need to reform the reform?
Yeah, I think that was an unfortunate phrase by the Holy Fathers, because he and Benedict XVI seemed to have a good relationship, even with Benedict in the garden, as you like to put it, behind St. Peter's. But I just got here this morning from Washington, and I can tell you that the people that I spoke with who have sons in the seminary, mothers and fathers of children in the seminary, or who are very fervent Catholics, who kind of appreciate the Latin Mass as a reconnection to a long tradition. They don't necessarily only want the Latin Mass, but they find themselves a little bit insulted and maybe even a little bit angry about this, because he said more than that there's rigidity. He said dig, there's rigidity, and maybe even more than that. So he kind of implied that there was almost a kind of a psychological imbalance. And look, the people who go into the seminaries these days are people who are going to be fervent Catholics, are going to be willing to live their lives somewhat in contradiction to the culture around them. And if those people are reacting negatively to the way they're being characterized, it's not a way to attract people into the priesthood or into a closer following of what the Church wants to do in a culture that's very anti-Catholic.
Very good. You can find Robert Royal's columns at thecatholicthing.org and keep up with Edward Penton at thenationalcatholicregister.com. When we return, he achieved unique status as a writer, a celebrity, and the undisputed godfather of modern conservatism in America. For the first time, his sweeping judgments on some celebrated figures around the world are collected in one place. James Rosen of Fox News joins me to discuss his latest project, a collection of eulogies by William F. Buckley, Jr. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Excuse the mess, but I can't pretend it's the only day I was ever messy.
Is this where you write your articles when you're here? And
yeah.
Notes?
So I do all my work here. This was once a four-car garage.
Oh.
So
you converted.
The first few years I did one, then another one. Inevitably that happened.
When you write, I'm told you play Bach.
A little bit, yeah.
Why?
Well, why not?
That was from my interview with Bill Buckley almost 20 years ago. He kept company with some of the most powerful politicians, celebrities, and intellectuals in the world. He was best known, of course, for founding the conservative magazine, National Review. A master of the written word, it turns out he wrote many eulogies over his lifetime. Fox News chief Washington correspondent James Rosen has curated those in a new book, A Torch Kept Lit, Great Lives of the 20th Century. He joined me to discuss this work and one of the most elegant literary stylists anywhere, William F. Buckley. Here's my interview with James Rosen. James, Christopher Buckley, William F. Buckley's son, says this could be the best and his favorite William F. Buckley book. Why do you think he said that?
Probably because it was and is. It's a great book. A Torch Kept Lit collects 50 of the eulogies that Bill Buckley either delivered at memorial services or wrote and published across his extraordinary career. In 30 some odd of these cases, he knew these people personally. And among his many distinctions as the godfather of modern American conservatism, the founder of National Review, the host of Firing Line, Buckley was also a best-selling spy novelist.
Right.
So to these remembrances of these towering and sometimes evil figures of the 20th century, Buckley brings his novelistic flair. And so he conjures the departed and enables the reader to meet and know these people as Buckley himself did. So I think that's perhaps why Chris liked it.
But this was your idea.
Yes.
There was no collected book of his eulogies
Correct.
or obituaries.
I conceived this, curated it, edited it. I provide an introduction at the beginning of the book and then a short prefatory note for each of the eulogies throughout the book.
Tell people where the idea first came from. You came across this in a bibliography somewhere.
I was researching an essay about Richard Nixon for National Review around the time of Nixon's centenary. And I was trying to find a specific Bill Buckley column about Nixon. That led me to a published book, a bibliography of Buckley's works, in which the editor at that time said, someday somebody should compile an anthology of Bill Buckley's eulogies because they're really emotionally shattering works and among his finest writing. And I finally said after I was done with my last book project, I went to Jack Fowler of the National Review. He green-lighted it. Christopher Buckley green-lighted it. So very grateful to them, and to a couple of other institutions, Hillsdale College and the Hoover Institution, which helped out in various research aspects.
And what impressed you most and drew you to these particular eulogies, the one you chose? And how did you go about choosing?
For me, what drew me most was the mixture of personal observation. Again, how often Buckley knew these people, hosted these people, debated these people, skewered these people directly, but also the grand sweep of his vision of the 20th century. Buckley was also an avid sailor. He made 5 transoceanic passages with his friends, and he had, I think, an oceanic view of the 20th century.
He was a good friend, you say. And you have some of his very personal obituaries here that he wrote about dear friends of his who were not well-known people.
Correct. Buckley had what some have described as a genius for friendship. He cultivated these friendships sometimes over decades. And I dare say, Raymond, that those of our viewers who give a torch kept lit as a gift, whatever the occasion, will find that it actually serves to deepen their friendships.
I want to talk about some of the people you highlight in the book. There are not that many presidents. I mean, JFK, Reagan, Eisenhower is here.
Nixon.
Nixon. Why did you choose those presidents, and what particularly do you think what insight did he have to those men, mostly Republican leaders, except for JFK?
And LBJ.
And LBJ.
We had space constraints, and we had a lot of eulogies that were great pieces of writing by Bill Buckley, for which I prepared prefatory notes and so on. Some of them very illustrious characters, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Clare Boothe Luce, that we eventually had to excise from the book. And we had 2 other presidents in there as well that unfortunately we had to excise from the book. We decided to start with Dwight Eisenhower because it was in Dwight Eisenhower's presidency that National Review was founded, and that Buckley first began this business of standing athwart history and yelling stop. I would say again that running through all of these remembrances is Buckley's singular literary voice. He had a great comic touch. He was able to describe people's faces, and again, he was a novelist, and he brings this to bear.
He also had a wide social circle, which included a lot of artists. Truman Capote, who was a friend to Mrs. Buckley, is included here. It's a kind of stingy. I was expecting more. That was the one, I have to say. I read that obituary and I thought,
there's actually 2 in there for Truman Capote. One shorter for the National Review audience and a little harsher, frankly. And then one for Buckley's syndicated column. But you know, there's a section for figures from the world of arts and letters in this book. And so there we find John Lennon, Elvis Presley,
Jerry Garcia.
Well, yeah, I say that A Torch Kept Lit is the only place in the world where you will find Milton Friedman right up alongside Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. And it's a tribute to the sort of shimmering orbit of Bill Buckley, this social life that you talk about.
Tell me what he might have thought about this political election that we're in. Bill Buckley was also, particularly as he got near the end of his life, he was rascally and a bit unpredictable as he went on. How do you think he'd take in this election season?
Buckley wrote critically about both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I think he would have been dismayed by the coarseness of this political season. Buckley recoiled from the profanity he heard expressed in private on the Nixon tapes, and I think he would have been saddened by the lowness of the discourse. It's not clear to me that he would have rejected Donald Trump simply because he had written critically about him in the past. Buckley had a motto which was always to support the most rightward viable candidate, and it's not clear to me that he would have preferred a Hillary Clinton presidency in this setting. That said, Raymond, as you know, it's a dangerous business to try and imagine what the departed would say about contemporary events and personalities. But I do think he'd be saddened by the tenor of it all.
When you read this book, when I read this book, because he is basically reflecting on the lives of those he knew in many instances, or those he crossed swords with or engaged in public life, it does cause one to ponder those last things. And you see him getting more reflective. The shock, I guess, of the losses wear off on him over time. Did you come away with any new appreciation of his faith and his view of what awaits us?
Well, I'm glad we're discussing it because one cannot separate out from any of the facets of Bill Buckley's multifaceted dimensions his faith. And to me, outside of his explicit writings on faith, which included a sort of capstone book called Nearer My God from 1997, which he subtitled An Autobiography of Faith, it seems to me that his eulogies most closely fuse his literary gift and his religious faith. The eulogy is not, strictly speaking, a part of the Catholic Mass. Right. But Buckley venerated something he called the patrimony, which you know well, which was the sort of corpus of earthly and celestial truths that are handed down through the millennia and which are inarguable. And the first precept amongst which is, people die, but God endures. And by properly summing up a given life, whether it was good or evil, I think Buckley felt he was venerating the patrimony, and it could have a fortifying effect on those who survive.
I interviewed Bill Buckley about his book, Nearer My God, in 1997, and asked him about the intersection of his faith and politics.
I want to talk for a moment about the intersection between your politics and your faith. Russell Kirk said your politics are more a function of your faith than your economics. How true is that?
The Bible absolutely insists on individual sovereignty in conscience and makes the case for freedom. God created us to be free. Under the circumstances, if you want complementary positive law, it should be a law that encourages that freedom. In my judgment, that which does so most successfully and which permits the development and the distribution of scarce resources is conservative political ideals of the kind that I have backed. That is the sense in which the two are connected. The insistence on the individuality of the human being. If we are, in fact, in God's eyes, all different, then any society that seems to say that we are not different has got to be wrong.
Are you stunned as you look back now, as you talk to young people? I know you talk at colleges, you're traveling the country all the time, that the memory of Bill Buckley does not shine brighter. Just a few, what is it? How long has it been since his passing?
8 years.
A decade?
Yeah.
8 years, almost 8 years, almost a decade. Like Gore Vidal, in many circles, Bill Buckley is all but forgotten.
I wouldn't posit any equivalence there. But
neither would he.
Yeah, no, he wouldn't countenance it.
Yeah, no, he'd throw something at me.
I think that it's not altogether surprising insofar as I saw a poll done around 2000, which showed that if you were over the age of 30 at that time, your name recognition of Paul McCartney was something close to 100%. Whereas if you were under 30, it suddenly dropped in the year 2000 to about 70%, right? So Bill Buckley, that he's here, that this book is on the New York Times bestseller list.
And it is. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. This speaks to what I think is a real hunger in today's coarsened political climate for an individual and an era of greater civility and wit in politics.
And grace. When I read it, I kept thinking, there are so few graceful writers today. And in the popular circle, that can actually make a difference. And even when they're spiteful, his eulogy of, or his obit rather, of Ayn Rand is dripping in
an exercise in triumphalism almost.
Right.
But when we say that he was a graceful writer, and this is important for our viewers, his gracefulness was not just a matter of style. It sprang from true grace as conferred through his religiosity.
Tell me, you said you've had an experience as a result of writing this book, and you feel that Buckley has communicated with you in some way?
This is inarguable, okay? So what happened was I got a call from the editors at Crown Publishing a few weeks ago to tell me, James, are you sitting down? It was like a speakerphone deal. Yes. You have just made, a torch kept lit has just made the New York Times bestseller list, and the way they put it specifically was, you have returned Bill Buckley to the New York Times bestseller list. A lot of his books were bestsellers. He used to joke that he maintains a small apartment on the New York Times bestseller list. And I said the appropriate things, and the call concluded. And not long thereafter, I received a call from the aforementioned Jack Fowler, who is the publisher of National Review, to say, James, do you know who, we'll say, Person X is? Person X was a longtime editor at National Review, someone who edited my first article that was ever published anywhere back in 1992 for National Review. Person X is dying. Person X is not doing well and doesn't have long to live, and Person X was a hoarder, such as you would see on one of those TV shows.
Oh, wow.
And Jack told me that he was going through Person X's effects and came across a VHS cassette tape that was labeled on the outside, Interview with James Rose in November 2000, and did I want to have it? Now, I immediately recognized that this was the interview I did with William F. Buckley Jr. for Fox News around the time of his 75th birthday in the fall of 2000. That's probably what this VHS tape was. Fox News has the raw footage of my camera angle, his camera angle, what aired on television, and so on. I really didn't need this Max L VHS tape that was so labeled, but I said, okay, send it along, Jack, because good reporters are a bit of a hoarder, too. It arrived 2 days after the phone conversations I've described. And there it was, a year 2000 Max L video VHS cassette, right? Labeled Interview with James Rosen, November 6, 2000. I took one step that Jack, naturally enough, didn't think to take, which was to remove the cassette tape from the cover. And there it was, your standard black VHS tape. But what tumbled out was a blue index card. That was a piece of stationery stamped National Review, 215 Lexington Avenue, William F. Buckley Jr. And there, in his handwriting, in red ink, it said as follows: "For James Rosen, please return. I hope I didn't screw up! Exclamation mark, B." Now, this didn't reach me a year from now, or a year ago, or 6 weeks ago, or 6 weeks from now. It happened literally within hours of them saying, "You've returned Bill Buckley to the New York Times bestseller list." And there it is: "For James Rosen, please return. I hope I didn't screw up! Exclamation mark, B." How many times did the man write the words James Rosen in his life? Probably twice. Once when I shoved a book at him when I first met him, right? And then on this occasion. This has been sitting in that hoarding scene for 16 years and reached my hands almost certainly as a communication from the grave and as a reaffirmation of what Bill himself would have been the first to tell us is the realism of divine intervention.
Wow.
You're the first person that I've told that story to.
Well, I love that. And he would have loved you telling that here. Tell me what's next. You've got to do, obviously, if I know publishers, and I know Bill Buckley, you'll have to do a follow-up of some sort. What are you planning?
This is the kind of book that's probably going to stay in print for a while. It's now in its 7th printing. So I don't think there will be a sequel per se. I have been approached to do another project, another book project. It's very preliminary. Let's just say it would be along the lines of a concise biography. Of a figure probably dear to your heart and to the hearts of our viewers, but that's about all I should say right now.
Okay, we'll leave it there. James Rosen, thank you so much,
thank you,
as
Raymond.
always.
Very
Thanks for
kind of
being
you.
here. And I'm elated to see that the great man has returned to the New York Times bestseller list.
Thank you. I would sooner be governed by the first 2,000 names in the Boston Telephone Directory than by the faculty of Harvard University.
Thank you,
bad, right?
James Rosen.
Thank you, Raymond.
A Torch Kept Lit, Great Lives of the 20th Century by William F. Buckley Jr., edited by James Rosen, is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Well, that's all the time we have until next week. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. And on December 5th, I'll be in Orange County at the Christ Cathedral in conversation with author Ron Hansen live. And you can join us. All the info for tickets is on my website at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week for the Thanksgiving special. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm going to rest this voice. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.